Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 6th of December 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined by live video Skype link by Dave Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. Weather, it's just grey, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just grey. We'll leave the weather. It's a bit UK-ish and not brilliant. Much the same across the realm of politics at the moment, but we thought we'd just open with a little look at what sort of leaders we've got leading the country. And this was sent in to us. It's part of Guido Fawkes' website, obviously, but he'd been quick to spot that our old friend Brooks Newmark has put himself out and about on the town, and here he is campaigning with the Tories' Women to Win. And we'll be having a little look at those in a minute. But as Guido had pointed out, it was remarkable that this man should step forward helping campaigning in the constituency because, of course, it was only a few months ago that he was taking a rather different view of women. Or maybe that's why he wanted them to win, Mike.
I don't know.
Just in case nobody realises that it's the one on the left that is actually Brooks Newmark, and there were some other photographs that he took of himself in his bathroom, but I think it's a little bit early in the day for that. So let's have a look at Women to Win, and of course this is Conservative organisation, so you can trust all these people, and the lady we've got here is Baroness Anne Jenkin of Kennington. I always love it when they've got a title and you know where they reside because it fills you with confidence. And so I took a little look at the website, and here I found David Cameron speaking to all of these lovely ladies, but I was absolutely fascinated as to what he said, and this is what he said. If we truly want to dominate the political landscape and be the party that we could be, the party that we dream of. So no messing around. This was a little while ago, but David Cameron
Dreaming of a one-party state? Dreaming
of a one-party state. And this was a very, very interesting video clip. It was obviously extremely well put together. It reminded me of sort of thing you would see in the late 30s in the style of it. I think I can help our viewers with this because this lady was just gazing with pure love and admiration at the leader as he spoke. I wasn't able to hear what she was whispering, but I could take a little look into her mind. Oh, David, I've fallen under the spell of your powerful, commanding leadership. Yep, let's build the Conservative Reich and rule for the next 1,000 years. Well, if you're not convinced by that little part of the video, it was also interested that this young lovely, Amber Rudd, was there. And what was she thinking? Well, I think it was along the lines of David is right, the party must come first, we must dominate. Nothing must get in our way. Scandals, drugs, child abuse. We must crush all victims and protest quickly and efficiently. We must strive for the rules-based international order. So it appeared to me that the evidence for the fact that we have a conservative dictatorship being installed under our very noses, the evidence is all around us. And I believe, David, that Mr. Skinner was also of the opinion a dictatorship was coming in the United Kingdom.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Yeah, there was no ambiguity. Dennis said immediately, I asked him the question. I said, do you see this as a dictatorship form? And he said, yes, straight away without any hesitation. So these pieces here that we're seeing, I mean, the words that I'm picking up on are a domination. So that that's they're not really leaving any ambiguity to anyone now. We best all just sort of wake up and start challenging quickly.
Well, thank you for that. What's particularly interesting about that little video clip, if people care to go and watch it for themselves, is you see David Cameron mentions the country as an afterthought. He first of all says that the important thing is to dominate politics. and the party. And after that, he obviously realises that he needs to be mentioning the country. Presumably, he's doing something for the country, don't know what. And that slipped into it. And of course, what Women to Win are boasting about is that they are driving for equality within the political system. And we'll simply qualify that statement to say, are we getting the right quality of women who are coming forward? Is Theresa May the right woman? Is Amber Rudd the right woman? Well, as we see later in the news when we discuss what's happening with Melanie Shaw, I don't think so, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to international affairs, because obviously Syria continues to dominate the news. Syrian government making gains in Aleppo as Russia and China block a truce, according to ITV News. Now, of course, Aleppo, the Syrian military continue to take areas of Aleppo, and this is good news. ITV News calling it fierce fighting between two sides, and so on. But of course, as they say in the headline here, yesterday Russia and China blocked a Security Council resolution, much to the disappointment of none other than Matthew Rycroft, who's the UK's permanent representative to the United Nations, who really was whinging and whining about this, very bitter about it. Just 5 days ago, he said, "I sat in this chamber and asked, what will it take to stop the horror in Aleppo? Today, Russia and its small number of followers have shown that they have no interest, none whatsoever, in answering that question. Indeed, for the 6th time in 5 years, they've chosen to block meaningful action and hold this council to ransom." Not quite sure how they're holding it to ransom, but anyway, in doing so, he went on, and much more tragically, they've also held to ransom the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women and children currently enduring hell in Aleppo. Matthew Rycroft doesn't mention Mosul at all, because that would be inconvenient. It would demonstrate his hypocrisy, but nonetheless, he said, "So I urge all delegations to avoid hiding behind hypocritical, bogus procedural arguments." It's difficult not just to burst out laughing with this sort of nonsense.
As we're discovering, Mike, if we go through the news, it is becoming more and more difficult not to laugh because the hypocrisy is just so blatant.
Yes. China's veto in particular is surprising, he said. Despite repeated pronouncements against politicization and in favour of dialogue, China has decided to side with Russia, a party to the conflict. I could go on, but instead let me ask Russia another question. What did you seek to achieve today? Well, clearly what Matthew Rycroft was seeking to achieve was a timeout. And I would say that, the UK can't just call a timeout every time the UK's tame terrorists are losing the fight. That's what seems to be the agenda here. Just, call timeout. Stop. We can't do any more. These guys are losing. It's a bit inconvenient for them.
Thoroughly inconvenient. David, you might have some thoughts on this. Help us out, because we're having trouble keeping straight faces today because this stuff is so crass but humorous at the same time.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, Brian, Lord help us. I mean, you guys are at the coalface and you're seeing, you're sifting all this, continually day by day. But I've got to say here that I met with a governor former governor, subsequently, of one of Her Majesty's provinces. And he stated to me that he could now no longer, as effectively a very, very senior officer, could no longer understand what the FCO were doing. He found that they were completely back to front and inverted. And he could not tolerate the situation any longer, so he resigned. So I've got to say that all this is fitting in really here with what we're seeing, this language from Matthew Rycroft over there. And actually what's the reality over there in Syria is that we're not getting the proper information. We're getting inverted and perverted information. And it's all smoke and mirrors. So, thank goodness for some of the news outlets that are saying the right stuff, and the likes of Vanessa Beeley for revealing all the shenanigans that are going on out there. Where we find, and there's a news piece out just today that we're finding that the government have admitted somewhere in an editorial that they're aware that their money that they're pumping into Somalia is actually going to ISIS and Al-Shabaab. So these people are professional officers. They should have a good understanding of what they're doing. And to have this sort of stuff going on really is just absolutely abhorrent to see, any Her Majesty's government, perambulating in their offices in this fashion. It's just unacceptable, and it needs stopping.
Well, isn't it classic? We've got fake news being pumped out by the likes of the BBC, mainstream newspapers, and other channels. But the fake news is then being taken into not only Westminster, it's being taken into international places of decision. I'm trying to discuss the UN in a loose sort of way here. So this rhetoric and fake news is taken in and then discussed as if it's the real world.
Yeah.
But of course, these people are being caught out by their lies now at every turn, which produces yet another lie or an outright denial. And your comment about the British government funding terrorists, we did pick up on that, and we'll cover that particular story in a minute.
Well, let's look at some real news then, because this is Eva Bartlett writing from Syria in Mint Press. I strongly recommend, it's a long article, but it's worth the read. Aleppo, how US and Saudi-backed rebels target every Syrian. And really, I just want to reiterate the point that Andrew Ashcroft made when he was speaking to us on this programme a couple of months ago, and in the subsequent talks that he gave publicly. And that is the quote at the end of this article: Aleppo is one, Syria is one. We reject the division of Aleppo. We reject the division of Syria. And, everybody in the West wants to talk about Sunni this, Shia that, Christian the other. And in fact, the point that Eva and everybody and Andrew and everybody that's been speaking about this are trying to make is that this is not how the Syrians themselves view themselves. They don't view themselves in a sectarian way like this. So that, I think, was a really important point out of this article, but I do recommend everybody reads it. But back to the hypocrisy again, because RT reporting, sorry, the headline is Moscow slams West for staying silent on Russian hospital bombing. Russian Foreign Ministry, they say, has criticized Western leaders after none appeared to condemn the shelling of a mobile Russian hospital by militants in Syria. 2 Russian medics were killed after around a dozen shells hit the facility in Aleppo. So the quote from the ministry was, on December the 5th, a Russian military medic died as a mortar shell fired by militants directly hit the reception ward of a Russian mobile military hospital set up in Aleppo. 2 medical specialists were also severely injured, and one of them later died. So the terrorists in eastern Aleppo, what's left of them, continue to fire indiscriminately into the West. And of course, the Western politicians and Matthew Rycroft continue to say nothing about that.
Yep. They don't, Mike, because if they start to discuss the subject, the truth is going to come to the surface, so they simply can't talk about it.
Okay, well, let's have a quick discussion about the Supreme Court and what's going on there. James Eadie, QC, is the government lawyer who's presenting the case for why the government doesn't need to go and ask Parliament's permission to invoke Article 50. Of course, this is all part of the sort of delaying tactics that the government are continuing to use, because they don't really want to invoke Article 50. They don't want to do anything. There would be easier ways to get out of the European Union than going through that process. And actually, what is not really being mentioned too much is the elephant in the room, and that is, what is the Article 50 process in any case? Once it's invoked, can it be revoked? Well, nobody actually knows that. And if the government wins this Supreme Court case, then it goes to the next stage, which would be that they will proceed to invoke Article 50, and somebody will then take that to European courts to decide whether the I's can be dotted and the T's crossed over whether it can be revoked at a later date. So this is all just delaying tactics. It's all just nonsense about stirring up trouble and making sure there's plenty of argument. But actually, James Eadie today saying that the solution in legal terms is a one-line act. So he's even discussing what would be the options for the government should they lose this case at the Supreme Court, which would be to create a bill in Parliament, which is one line. He said it may be that would lead to all sorts of parliamentary complications and possible additions and amendments and so on, but that's a solution. And I'm going to say it again, this is where they intend to take this. They're going to lose this case. They intend to take this back to Parliament, put through this one-line bill. It's going to cause all kinds of amendments, discussion, delay, and so will go on forever.
The interesting thing about this, Mike, is of course what we were told back in the mid-70s, we were going into simply a trading bloc, and we can now see how simple that trading bloc is, because apparently we're drowning in a mire of rules and legalese, which mean that we can't get out, all total nonsense. But we've got two things happening. We've got this smokescreen of debate about Brexit, which isn't happening, and then we've got the construct of all the trade deals, which is heralding in a new what? British Empire.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but before we move on, I just wanted to mention the BBC on this, because both on the PM programme last night and the Today programme this morning on BBC Radio 4, the most important thing for them to discuss was the televisual circus act, the sort of what do people think the televisual spectacle that this thing is. This is a serious legal process which is going through here, and all the BBC wants to discuss is kind of like whether it is
razzmatazz,
whether it's equivalent to Celebrity Big Brother or something like that. They really are trying to take it down to the lowest possible level. And sort of deliberately laughing at the whole process.
Well, if they can keep it jokey, then people aren't going to take it as seriously. I am still stunned by the number of people who will say to me quite confidently that, well, we've got Brexit and it's happening. And when I say to them, no, it isn't, they immediately say to me, what do you mean? And they look quite concerned. But on the initial response that Brexit isn't happening, you get this... I just noticed a nod there from David. Have you've experienced the same?
Absolutely. Yeah, I see it everywhere, in all quarters. Oh, now we've Brexited. And you have to say, well, no, hang on. Nothing's happened. All we've had is hyperbole. And I've got to say, I think under the circumstances, May had a full mandate from the vote. She should have just the following day, when she took office, gone in and under the royal prerogative rescinded the 1972 Act instantaneously. Job done, finished. She had the mandate from the people, and the power lies with the people, not with Parliament. That's the Crown, the people. And she should have used the royal prerogative and just rescinded that Act straight away, job done, finished, and now let's start negotiating from that perspective. Because, make no bones about it, we were hoodwinked in 72. So the whole thing was a stitch up, and they've got to start using the right language and be a bit shorter and a bit sweeter with the things that they're saying. But all we're seeing is dallying. It's just dally, 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 dally. No good at all.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, we have Michel Barnier here giving a speech this morning all about what it means to be a member of the European Union. It comes up, he says, with rights and benefits. And third countries, that would be Britain, post-Brexit, can never have the same rights and benefits since they're not subject to the same obligations. And he said the single market and its four freedoms are indivisible. Cherry picking is not an option. And really, so this is Michel Barnier, by the way, is the lead European Union negotiator with regard to Brexit. So his point here, and the pressure continues to come back from the European Union. You don't really want to start this process because it's not going to work out well for you. So this comes back to what David's just said. We should just be doing this as a unilateral action. We shouldn't be going cap in hand begging for the best terms that we can get, because we're not going to get good terms, and we don't need the terms that are going to be offered. But we can say that Brexit, Trump, the Italian referendum and so on are sort of indicative of a general thread throughout society at the moment in the way people are recognising what's going on in the political circles. But Nigel Farage this morning said that what we've seen with this global trend in 2016 is just a start. This will roll on until the EU project in its current form is dead. The problem I have with this, I think, is, of course, Nigel Farage has never mentioned sovereign national credit. He's never mentioned common law constitution that we have. He's never mentioned what would replace the EU project. So the EU project in its current form is dead. What's going to replace it? And he doesn't discuss those things. And in fact, we get some clues. We've been talking about it for a long time now with the trade deals, with the military integration and various other things. So the EU project in its current form may well end up dead. But I'm going to say, what are we going to get instead?
Well, we're initially going to get chaos, Mike, and of course, once they've got chaos in, everything else can be built on top of that.
Absolutely. Well, maybe this gives a clue, because this is what you were talking about a second ago. Theresa May calls for a red, white and blue Brexit. This is absolute classic stuff, because what she's saying, the Prime Minister says the Royal Navy should police free trade on the high seas once we quit the EU, apparently. She said that that's going to result in a red, white and blue Brexit. As Britain steps up to forge a new positive, confident role for our country on the global stage, the Royal Navy is a really important part of our vision, pursuing our objectives of security on land and at sea and helping ensure the free flow of international trade. And indeed, that may have been the model that Britain had in the 18th and 19th centuries. But frankly, this statement, she's got to be off her head if she thinks that that's a realistic proposition.
I don't think she's off her head, Mike. I think she's just following orders and living in her own reality, subtly different. But I wondered we'd just have that slide back on screen, because what was I looking at? I am appalled at the state of that Captain Royal Navy who's wearing what? Some overalls? I mean, what is that man? What does he look like? I could say that I have seen many Serco cleaners who are in uniforms that you could at least be proud of, and that man is there in what? David, I picked up on this before, but we're seeing an immense attack on the armed services in UK, particularly the Royal Navy, but reducing them to wearing uniforms that are slovenly, unkempt and unprofessional is a subtle but very dangerous part of undermining the professionalism of the services. This is no accident we're seeing this.
No, it's no accident. And let's be very succinct about this. The wanton disregard, mismanagement of the Crown, Her Majesty's Armed Services, lock, stock and both barrels on recent history has been absolutely morally reprehensible, that they would draw down upon those services as if they were actually cash themselves in trading some road to God knows where, with this policy of cutting and blending into clearly marching towards EU military union or defence union. It's now blatant. Well, if Mrs. May wants to have the Royal Navy doing that job, she'd better well start ordering some ships and some British steel then, hadn't she? But no, we're not seeing that. We're seeing completely the opposite. We're seeing ministers going to Europe and parleying with the EU about EU defence union or military union. So the two things just, frankly, just are they trying to be deliberately contradictory? Well, what we need now is some clarity. Otherwise, she can be damned on the one hand by saying, well, this just frankly isn't good enough, and you're not, you might be doing the talk, but you're certainly not doing the walk. Well,
David, we can demonstrate that she's not doing the walk, and let's bring in Major General Magowan, Royal Marines. Now, he's an interesting gentleman, very senior. He loves Twitter, which is very good because he gives us information. But here's one of his tweets. It says, in Djibouti, visiting international partners. And then he says, our maritime patrol aircraft detachments support Element Atlanta, EU NAV Force Operation Atlanta. So I was very intrigued with the use of our, because of course Britain doesn't have any MPAs. So he's not interested in the fact that we don't have essential equipment. And we'll come on to these again in a minute when I think Mike's going to mention aircraft carriers. So we don't have essential equipment, major units. We don't get any statement from this Major General at all. He simply regards the EU flag, which he's proudly displaying, and the fact that it's ours. This is loyalty to the EU. I find this deeply offensive, and if there are any former British military personnel watching or listening to our broadcast today, I'm sure they would find it deeply offensive. But here we have a senior Royal Marines officer clearly just working for a foreign power. But it gets worse. Because this was another picture that he proudly tweeted out, and it says, Op Atlanta Operational Commander welcomes the head of mission, EU CAP Nesta, cooperation between EU missions helping Somalia. Well, I don't see a lot of help for Somalia at the moment, but they're strengthening the Somali maritime security. So here he is. We've got a Royal Marine General, Magowan, with his EU boss, Maria Cristina Stepanescu, and we've got a little bit more on her in a moment. No, it's okay. Let's bring this one in. This is the reality. When you track this base back, excuse me, where does it bring us? Well, it brings us to the Royal Navy headquarters at Northwood, Middlesex. So we are supposedly in Brexit, but what are we actually seeing? We're seeing this major EU-controlled mission being run from in the heart of the British command and control structure. This is incredibly dangerous. And again, David, you were warning people about this and the very, very short implementation time for the EU structure to simply take the whole of our military away from us.
Absolutely. The timescale, the realistic timescales for this to be activated across the entire EU zone are within one working day, and I've had that confirmed by two very senior officers. So let's not underestimate just what the capabilities of this are. There is a clear direction. They've playing their ace of trumps in effect by the work that they've done recently from passing the motion in the EU Parliament. They want desperately EU military union or defence union because it locks the nations in. It locks them in huge pillars of any society or national country, because once you take control of their military, once you take control of someone's military, they're then going to take control of the budget and the operational budgets, capital budgets, procurement budgets. So there's a huge amount of implications here. There's a huge amount of risks for a country to lose control of its own military and what it can and can't do with it, what it can and can't do as far as buying or whatever. In our case, selling. They seem to be doing rather all of that. Perhaps they'll take control of that as well. But the fundamentals here, of course, is that that all that money is a huge amount of money in political leverage, and it isn't being challenged. It just isn't being challenged. But coming back to the Royal Marine Major General here, this Twitter feed is entirely political.
Yes.
What we've got here is a very, very political promotion of a foreign country. This is because the EU is a country, it's a state. That's what its goal is. It wishes to be a state. Now, to do that, it needs its own military and it needs its treasury. So the military part is as important as its currency. Everybody's got to understand this. This is why this is important. Once it's got its currency, once it has its military, it will get a treasury and it will be a state, and it will have its political union, which is its ultimate objective to obtain.
Well, I'm sorry, just to interject there, David, you're spot on with this. It is a supranational state. It is a state. Let's just have a look at this lady again, who is controlling major military assets and is controlling a senior British military officer. So this is part of the website people need to go to. It's the EU's external action, and let's expand the lady a bit. Here she is, Nesta Head of Mission, Maria Cristina Stepanescu, and if we the text is a little bit small on this, but you can read what they say the mission is about, and it's all good, wonderful stuff, and it's all helping Somalia. But this is the image I wanted to bring back in. This woman is a former Romanian policewoman who is now heading up major assets, and she's the boss of a Royal Marine Major General. Words almost fail me, as you can hear. But he goes on. He's in Africa this week, visiting in Djibouti and the Seychelles, and our local partners about Operation Atlanta. So we've got a total lie going on here, David, as you've said. We've got Theresa May and Conservative politicians talking about Brexit. It is absolutely not happening. What they're actually doing is cementing things via the military. And this is the one you mentioned a bit earlier, the Mail here, with what it's calling a expose story, that they got hold of a Department for International Development report, a confidential report, that said it was certain that it was a certain fact that money that Britain was pouring into Somalia, a mere 568 million, was going to end up in the hands of terrorists, and it's specifically mentioning ISIS. So, Mike, is this incompetence, or is this really what we're seeing? Britain is saying it's going around the world helping foreign countries by bringing in DFID and pumping in money, but what we're really doing is funding the terrorists in the first place.
Well, this is exactly the point that we've been trying to make with Vanessa on the white helmets. So money goes into the white helmets, but it doesn't stay with the white helmets. It's disappearing into the hands of al-Nusra and ISIS, and so it's a money laundering exercise.
Yep.
Department for International Development's Priti Patel are laundering money to terrorists through international development budgets. And remember when Boris Johnson was in Gaziantep in Turkey recently, and he said he was giving another £32 million to the White Helmets. That was not humanitarian money, that was non-humanitarian aid. Yep. So White Helmets is supposed to be a humanitarian organisation, so why was they getting non-humanitarian aid budget? Because the intention for the money was non-humanitarian purposes.
Yeah. So we've got money which is clearly going through to terrorist units, and then the other side of the coin is we're trying to blame the Russians for what's happening in Syria at the moment. The Russians are doing the job that needs to be done, which is freeing up the Syrian public from terrorist attacks. But here's the hype coming in, and I've got a Telegraph article here. Royal Navy ship monitors Russian destroyer through British waters. Well, this is fake news, because what's going on here is that a Russian unit, a Udaloy class, Vice Admiral Kulikov, is moving back from the Mediterranean up to the Russian bases in the north, and it's transiting UK. It has to do that. It's the nature of the geography of the world. But suddenly this has become a terrible threat. But look at the quality of the reporting, Mike. Royal Navy sailors were watching the Udaloy through binoculars. Can you imagine that? We were at sea looking at this ship through binoculars, and we were using a thing called radar to track her course and speed.
Advanced technology.
Well, the reason for this childish, crass reporting is, of course, there is no real story, and they've got to comment on something. But what's it to do with, this is more propaganda designed to make the Russians out to be the cause of the trouble in Syria.
Absolutely. But David, we've got some good news here, because the contract to construct the F-35B support facilities has been awarded. It's a £27 million contract, and it's providing facilities at RAF Marham to support the new F-35B. And according to the government's press release, it's been awarded to Waits Construction Limited, and is part of a £250 million programme of works to ready RAF Marham for the arrival of the aircraft. And the quote from the principal project manager was, "This award is great news. We look forward to working collaboratively with Waits to ensure the successful delivery of this important MOD project." So we've got to be grateful for this, don't we?
No.
No, didn't think so.
We used to build a whole tranche of every kind of aircraft in this country. When they swept it all up, one dustbin with Duncan Sandy's EU conglomerate bill. So no, I'm not holding with it at all. This is almost sort of demeaning to anybody that's been in the industry and knows exactly what it was like beforehand. So there wasn't anything that we didn't build in this country, lock, stock and barrel, everything. So, I'm frankly, just to say we get the sweepings off the floor with this arrangement is just derogatory to anybody in the big engineering family of Great Britain. So no, I don't agree with it at all.
Okay, well, this next one's even better, and I'd advise everybody to hold on to their hats and don't wet yourselves just quite yet, because the headline is British supercarrier to sail in disputed South China Sea, and this is the new supercarrier, the HMS Queen Elizabeth, and it is apparently going to sail through the South China Sea in 2020 amid concerns regarding freedom of navigation in the Asia-Pacific region, according to this article.
Yeah, it's excellent, isn't it? So we know that the dispute's still going to be going on in another 3 years. How do they know that? Because they're helping to create it. But why would you want to send an aircraft carrier to the South China Seas? Because China's been declared a friend of the United Kingdom, such a friend that they're going to be allowed access to our nuclear power generation infrastructure. So why would we want to do something hostile like send an aircraft carrier to the China Sea? To which your reply, Mike, is, well, don't worry, because the thing doesn't really exist at the moment. It's built, but it's not worked up. It doesn't have aircraft. Have we got the escorts?
Well, let me just quote Kim Darroch before I ask David for comment. And he said, as we bring our 2 new aircraft carriers on stream in 2020, and as we renew and update our defence forces, they will be seen in the Pacific, and we absolutely share the objective of this US administration and the next one to protect freedom of navigation and keep sea routes and air routes open. So, David, you must be impressed.
No, not at all. I think this is just complete and utter bunkum nonsense. It's almost the whole thread of jam tomorrow and sort of completely disarray policy from one end of the spectrum to the other. Look, you can't have the Chinese here if they're such a big bag, nasty thing in charge of nuclear reactors and nuclear material, and essentially fissile material, FISMAT. So, if this high stakes game, and what we're talking about here is incredibly high stakes stuff here. If this is the case, what would actually happen is there's 2 options. One, that carrier will get blown up in harbour. That's the precedent for this sort of stuff. Or 2, they'll detonate the nuclear reactors that they're in charge of if they can't get their own way. So this is an absolute nonsense. You can't have somebody being held to ransom like this on the one hand, and then we're threatening them with going and parking those flat tops down in their sea. Utter nonsense.
Yeah, but David, what a threat. We're going to threaten you in 2020 if we've actually got our aircraft carrier. We're flexing our muscles on the basis that in 2020 we might possibly have a fully operational aircraft carrier. I think that's a pretty tall call at the moment. Where are the assets to go with it? Because you can't just push an aircraft carrier on its own into hostile waters. Well, we haven't got those assets. So this is Alice in Wonderland stuff. It's just extraordinary, but the government believes it. We know you're keen to go. Just give us a brief comment on this tweet. There's a few tweets for Sir Gerald Howarth. I picked out one. He says, let's welcome the Prime Minister's caution over Chinese investment. They're the ones taking over the South China Sea and posing threats to our security. So Sir Gerald Howarth thinks the Chinese are a threat. So that's why we've invited him into the country to rebuild our nuclear power generation. And then it says it's NATO that's keeping us safe. The EU spends more on propaganda than security. But you've got a picture there, or one of his tweets, with Churchill. Sorry, I had to think for a moment there, but I can't quite read the text on that. What have you picked up?
Well, I'm coming back to. Well, I mean, absolutely. This is sort of almost going down the John Redwood style of stuff, where can we just have clarity, please, over these things? We need to be stopping whatever the overzealous control of the party is, and have clarity for the sake of the nation. Someone's got to put the nation first here, because this is getting towards the sort of watershed moment with this EU defence and military union. And this tweet that he put out some time ago, when I had communication with him on it, on the one hand, he denied any knowledge of the EU C3 Command and Control military HQ scenario, or that they were built. What I said is, well, they'd been built because we've been told this by the guys that built them. To then denying all, no, don't know what you're talking about. To then on his Twitter, then put this tweet out subsequent to that about that him and William Hague had prevented them being set up in the past. So, sorry, this is unacceptable, because what we've then got, is David Cameron saying there were no plans. Well, clearly there were a lot of plans, otherwise you wouldn't engage in this sort of work. So Gerald Howarth here is the head and the chair and the president of one of the biggest policy drivers in the Conservative Party, Conservative Way Forward, along with, I believe Lord Tebbit is the president. I think he's the chairman. So this is the opportunity now for let's have some clarity on this issue from these politicians, because I don't think we're getting it at the moment. But on the contradictory stuff with the China, we're saying caution on the one hand, and then we're having this jam tomorrow saber rattling. What on earth are they doing? This is bonkers.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they know anymore. David, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to finish on some other items, but I know that you are short for time, so thank you very much for that input. Well, let's end today by having a look at how our politicians really treat us, and what better place to go than an update on Melanie Shaw. Now, yesterday I was given a reasonable amount of information about what's been going on around her. It's very difficult to get information because, of course, the prison is stopping all but one or two people getting in to see Melanie. Now, we understand that the end of last week there was a court appearance. Melanie was denied the ability to appear in person. She was given a Skype link, but apparently this was cut off when the judge objected to some of her statements. Now, remember that Melanie's been in solitary confinement for well over 7 months. I would guess that anybody's mental state after that form of torture, because that's what the United Nations says solitary confinement is, would be influenced, so we don't know whether it was the information that Melanie was giving that was causing the judge problems, or the manner with which she put it across. But what I do know, having seen Melanie perform in court before, is that she is usually exceptionally measured and clinical in what she says. But the judge has apparently demanded another psychiatric assessment. This, we understand, is the third they've tried to get hold of, and the inference is the state wants her sectioned, but they're not getting the right psychiatric report back in. There's been no application for bail, and this is largely because the legal team which the court appointed are simply not doing their job. That's the figures about solitary confinement. She's let out usually for about half an hour per day, and that is to go and get a shower, and in that 30 minutes she gets almost no contact with other prisoners. Now, remember, this lady's endured this now for over 7 months, and this is the other mysterious thing, that it's alleged that a prison probation officer has instructed Nottingham City Homes to evict Melanie and her possessions, and apparently those possessions are now out of the house, and they're going to be disposed of on the 16th of December unless they are claimed. Now, we know that the prison has denied that they even have a probation officer. Well, they've denied there is a probation officer dealing with Melanie, so the prison is saying it's not us. We contacted Nottingham City Homes this morning. We've asked them for a comment, which we haven't yet received, but the source of information to us is very reliable, and so it would seem that there's something untoward at least going on with Melanie's accommodation. Well, let's bring on top of that an update over the Metropolitan Police whistleblower. Remember, this very brave policeman spoke out about the cover-up of child abuse, trafficking, prostitution, and even the death of children. We tried very hard to get a response. We tried an open letter to the policing minister, Mr. B. Lewis. Well, of course, he didn't want to do anything. He has remained silent, and so clearly it's not a concern of his that people are being affected by this. And this one was sent to me today. The print is a little bit small, but of course, if you freeze it, you'll be able to have a look at it. This was text from the IPCC. They'd initially denied any knowledge of the Metropolitan Police officer and his testimony, but they've come back to a particular person and said this: I write further to your letter of the 16th of November in which you queried the basis upon which the information requested in your letter of 4 October was refused. I've reviewed the matter and it appears that an error has been made in dealing with your request, for which I apologise. In your letter, you inquired whether, in summary, allegations made by an officer in an interview with Mr. Brian Gerrish, the child abuse cover-up, a police whistleblower speaks, are being investigated by IPCC. I'm able to confirm, in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, that certain allegations made by this officer were reported in 2014 and are currently subject to an independent investigation. You've also requested that the IPCC provides an estimate of the timescale in which the investigation will be completed. 2 target dates are currently recorded on the IPCC systems: the 19th of April 2017, a date automatically generated by our system, and the 20th of January 2017. However, such dates are subject to ongoing review and no formal target range has yet been set in respect to this investigation. These dates should be reviewed accordingly. So in my opinion, Mike, and please correct me, what the IPCC is doing is saying there's a cover-up. The investigation has been ongoing since 2014, and remember, we're not just talking the abuse of children, because that police officer was talking about finding children dead in the gutter, but here we are in 2016, 2 years later, no progress, and they're calmly saying we don't really know when we're going to get to the bottom of this because our computer has generated a date and that may be wrong. So the computer's making the decision. Well, bring in the Justice Committee because it gets better. So thank you very much to the gentleman who sent us through this letter. And it's come from Bob Neal MP, who's the chairman of the Justice Committee. Let's have a look at what he has to say. He's saying, first of all, I should first make clear that appointment of MPs to select committees is a matter for their political parties and the House as a whole. It's not a matter for the committee concerned or its chair. My duty as chair of the Justice Committee is to work with all MPs duly appointed to the committee, and I do not comment on any individual members of the committee. I believe this refers to Keith Vaz. And secondly, you asked me to use my powers to end what you described as the victimisation of child abuse whistleblowers and to support the release of Melanie Shaw from prison. I'm afraid the Justice Committee is not permitted to intervene in individual cases, so neither I nor the committee have any powers which we could exercise in relation to her case. This is a matter for the legal process. It's also a matter on which a constituency MP may be able to assist her. So with regard to unsuitable MPs, that's not a concern of the Justice Committee. Why would it be, Mike? I mean, let's get anybody on there. And then the fact that child abuse survivors are harassed, threatened and abused, that's no concern of theirs either. So we are now clearly seeing that actually Westminster is out of control. It's a very safe haven if you're a criminal.
So the role of a select committee is to hold Parliament to account for its actions or its inactions. And in the case of Melanie Shaw, for example, there's been complete inaction from her own constituency MP and a whole bunch of other MPs that have been approached about this. It certainly would not be unreasonable for the Justice Select Committee to ask some pretty pertinent questions of those MPs.
No, it's not. It's not part of their role.
Okay.
I think their role is to just sit there and chew fat and drink cups of tea, but certainly we don't want to ask any difficult questions of the government because that would be embarrassing. And if somebody's got trouble with the police over drugs and rent boys, and they want to sit on the committee. That's no responsibility of ours. So we're seeing very clearly what is going on now in UK. Let's end on Robert Greene, because part of the story is also here. So Robert has recently been pursued by bailiffs who've been after civil court costs. He tracked back the documentation the bailiffs had, and it originated from the Crown Office, but they had been able to get the bailiffs enacted via a High Court application, but they simply didn't bother to tell Robert Greene about that High Court hearing, so he couldn't defend himself. Now that is a clear breach of law, and this is very interesting. Robert has now received professional legal advice from several different sources that say, Robert, you have a clear case to take on the United Kingdom. So Robert is being pushed to go towards the EU Court of Human Rights. Now we could say, could we possibly agree with that? Well, the minimum that's happening here, of course, is that this is able to drive a wedge into the system, and it's capable of producing publicity. So we could have a discussion about using an EU court, but the point here is that the United Kingdom has simply broken the law in order to push through a civil case, which it appears would track back to former Procurator Fiscal Eilish Angelini. So we're seeing very, very strange things unfold in UK. Have we got a government? Probably not. Are we in a democracy? Definitely not. Are we under the rule of law? Definitely not. It's time to act. And on that note, we'll leave you today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're not a subscriber to UK Column, we need your help and support, so please consider taking out a subscription, or if you can, make a donation. We can only do what we do with your help. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, sorry.